The wind had teeth that morning. It gnawed through the wool of his coat and found the sweat beneath his shirt, long since gone cold. The plains stretched on like a blade scraped bare by the season. Nothing moved but the brittle grass hissing against his trouser legs and the two small bodies slumped against the broken wagon bench behind him. His children, asleep, mouths parted, lashes trembling from dreams he could not enter and sorrows he could not fix. He had carried them as far as he could. The wagon axle had snapped 4 days ago on a rut that looked like nothing until it wasn't. The hired driver had cursed once, unhitched his horse, and ridden back the way they came, without a word of apology or a cent of refund. The last settlement had given Caleb Whitmore a half loaf of hard bread, a tin of water, and directions. Keep moving, they said. Copper Bend is still 2 days' walk. He had made it nearly one. His arms throbbed from carrying Noah, the youngest. The boy weighed no more than a sack of grain, but was harder to hold for how he twisted in sleep and whimpered for things Caleb could not give. His hands trembled. He had torn the skin of his right palm yesterday trying to lever a board from the broken wagon to brace his ruined boot sole. The bleeding had not stopped. Not really. A dark bloom spread through the strip of shirt sleeve he had tied around it, brown at the edges, red at the center. Caleb sat beside the road where the cottonwoods grew lean and leafless, each one bent with the weight of wind and years. His children had fallen asleep in the shade of a dry-branched one that cracked faintly overhead like it still remembered how to speak. He watched them now, mouths stained with dust, cheeks sunken just enough to show the bones beneath. Emmeline, the eldest at 7 years old, clutched Noah's foot in her sleep like she was still standing guard. Even unconscious, the girl would not let go. Noah 3 curled beside her with his thumb near his mouth and his knees pulled to his chest. A buzzard circled low above the ridge. Once, twice. It did not leave. Caleb stood, staggered. His knees did not want to hold him anymore. He swayed and caught himself on the branch above. His mouth was dry. He had not drunk since dawn, saving the last swallow in the canteen for the children. He could see it there tucked beneath the blanket. He already knew it was nearly empty. 2,000 miles. That was how far he had come. From a cold rented room in Hartford, Connecticut, where his wife Sarah had died of consumption 14 months before Noah learned to walk on his own. From the silence that followed her funeral when his brother Thomas had written back to his desperate letter with 6 words that broke something inside him. Do not come. I cannot help. He had found the advertisement in a newspaper left on a church pew, a small square of ink between ads for tonics and land sales. Coulter family in Montana Territory seeks husband for eldest daughter, has ranch and land, willing to take children, honest work, honest life. He had written that night, his hands shaking. His ledger closed for the last time because the firm that employed him had let him go 2 months prior after he reported the senior partner for stealing from clients. They had not fired him for cause. They had simply stopped giving him work, stopped paying him, stopped acknowledging he existed until he stopped existing on their books altogether. Then they told every accounting firm in Hartford that Caleb Whitmore was a troublemaker. Emmeline had held the lantern while he wrote his letter to Montana, serious as a deacon, and asked no questions. The person who wrote back signed the letters as Wren Coulter. The handwriting was neat and warm, detailed. The letters described the ranch, the mountains, the clean air, the space where children could run. They said the family admired a man who would cross the country for his children. They said someone would meet him at the station. He signed the marriage contract, sold every piece of furniture, bought 3 train tickets, and rode 2,000 miles west with nothing but a trunk, 2 children, and a promise written in ink by a person he had never met. No one met him at the station. He waited 3 hours on the platform with Noah on his hip and Emmy holding his free hand. Then he hired a wagon and driver to take him to Copper Bend. The driver got him halfway before the axle snapped and the man abandoned them on the road. Caleb carried Noah. Emmy walked. Until now. Caleb looked up at the buzzard. It circled again, lower. He stepped between the bird and his children. His legs shook. His vision swam, but he stood. Then came the sound. Not thunder, not hooves at first, just a hum, the kind that climbs from the ground when weight begins to draw near. He turned his head, slowly squinting against the pale sun. Not one rider but 3, moving toward him on the dust-colored road. 3 horses, rangy but strong, pale with trail dust. Three riders sitting easy in their saddles with the posture of people who had been born on horseback and never quite dismounted. Three women. The one in front rode a dark bay mare. She was lean and sun-browned, her hair the color of chestnuts pulled back in a loose braid that the wind was slowly undoing. She wore men's trousers tucked into scuffed boots and a cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled to her elbows, showing forearms corded with muscle. Her eyes were green, not soft green, the green of deep timber, the kind that swallowed light and gave nothing back. A thin scar crossed the back of her left hand from knuckle to wrist, pale against tan skin. She could not have been older than 27, but her face carried the kind of stillness that comes from years of deciding things alone. Behind her rode a woman with auburn hair and a rifle balanced across the pommel of her saddle, like it belonged there the way a hand belongs at the end of an arm. Her eyes were gray and sharp, and they moved across Caleb and the children and the broken wagon and the road ahead with the quick assessment of someone who cataloged danger before she cataloged anything else. The third rider was younger than the others, maybe 20 or 21, with honey-colored hair and amber eyes that held a warmth the other two did not show on the surface. She led a pack horse behind her, loaded with supplies. They reined in 20 paces away and did not speak right away. The woman in front looked at the children first, both of them. Her eyes moved slowly from face to face, lingering on Noah, then on Emmy's hand, still gripping the little boy's foot. Then she looked at Caleb, at his bleeding hand, at his dust-covered city clothes, at the polished boots that had been ruined by 4 days of walking on roads they were never built for, at the road ahead that offered nothing but more of the same. She swung down from the saddle with a motion that was more liquid than effort, dusted her hands on her thighs and walked over. She knelt beside Noah, said nothing, just studied the boy's sleeping face like it was a map she was trying to read. Then she turned and looked up at Caleb. Steady, patient, a face carved by weather and work and something deeper than either. Behind her eyes there was a tiredness that did not come from the trail. "Yours?" she asked. He nodded, jaw clenched against a sharp ache rising in his chest. She looked at the road ahead, then back at the children, then at him. "I can carry them, both of them, if you can ride." His voice cracked from disuse. "You are not with anyone, my sisters." She tilted her head toward the two women behind her. "Nobody else." Caleb stared at her. There was no fear left in him, just the dry husk of it, a shell worn smooth by too much use. He glanced at her saddle and saw something that made him pause. A dark stain on the leather near the pommel. Dried blood, not fresh but not old either. She followed his eyes. "Heifer got caught in wire 2 days back," she said. "Had to hold her down to cut her free." The explanation came easy, not defensive. The voice of a woman who was used to blood being part of the work. "Where are you headed?" she asked. "Copper Bend." Her jaw tightened. Something dark moved behind her eyes. She looked away for a moment, then back. "That is not a place for you and these children," she said. Caleb waited for more, but none came. He wanted to press, wanted to ask what she knew about Copper Bend and why her face had changed at the name. But the ground was tilting beneath him, and his vision was narrowing to a point, and Noah was beginning to stir on the bench with a thin cry that meant hunger. The youngest woman, the one with the amber eyes, was already moving. She dismounted and approached Noah with hands that were gentle and sure, scooping the boy against her chest before he fully woke. Noah squirmed, once looked at the strange face, and then settled against her warmth with the absolute trust that only very young children and very tired ones can manage. Caleb watched his son rest against this stranger's shoulder and felt something crack inside him that he had been holding together for a very long time. "You got a name?" the woman in front asked. "Caleb. Caleb Whitmore." She gave a single nod. "Wren Coulter." She gestured behind her. "Sage, and Darcy holding your boy." Caleb felt the name land in his chest like a stone. Wren Coulter. The name on the letters. The name on the contract. The woman who was supposed to meet him at the station and did not. She did not seem to recognize his name in return. There was no flicker of expectation or connection. Just the practical attention of a woman assessing a problem and deciding how to solve it. They worked with quiet efficiency. Sage, the auburn-haired one, helped Emmy onto the pack horse and adjusted the supplies to make room. Darcy tied a blanket into a sling for Noah, securing him against her chest. Wren helped Caleb into her own saddle, one hand firm on his elbow, careful not to jostle him. He felt the heat of the leather through his trousers and the lingering warmth of where she had sat. Wren did not mount. She took the reins and began to walk. She walked for 5 hours, through dust and sage and the long silence of the empty plain. She did not complain, did not slow, did not ask him for a conversation. Her boots crunched steady on the hard-packed road, and her back stayed straight, even when Caleb could see her shoulders beginning to tire. The riflewoman Sage rode ahead and behind, in turn scanning the horizon with those gray eyes that missed nothing. Darcy hummed to Noah, who had fallen back asleep, and Emmy sat rigid on the pack horse with the determined expression of a child who has decided she will not show weakness to strangers. Caleb watched Wren from the saddle, this woman who had appeared out of the plain with two sisters, and the kind of competence that turned difficulty into routine, and tried to understand what kind of person walks 5 hours in the sun for someone she does not know. He could not. They stopped beside a creek where willows dipped their branches low, and the water ran clear over smooth stones. Not much of a camp, a fire pit marked by blackened rocks and a patch of trampled grass, but it looked like deliverance to Caleb. Darcy laid Noah on a folded bedroll beneath the largest willow. Sage helped Emmy down, and the girl immediately went to her brother, placing one hand on his chest to feel him breathe. Wren helped Caleb from the saddle. His legs buckled when he touched the ground. She caught his elbow. "You all right?" He nodded. He was not. She did not ask again, just pointed toward the creek. "Go on, water is clean." He knelt by the bank and drank with both hands, too fast, too desperate. The cold hit his belly like a fist. Still he drank until his palms ached and his lips cracked. Behind him he heard Sage building a small fire while Darcy tended to the children. When he returned, the Sage was heating something in a battered tin cup. The children lay wrapped in Wren's coat, both of them, small bodies tucked close. Wren had given them her only coat. "I have some beans," Darcy said. "They are not much." She passed him the tin. The beans were plain and lukewarm, but he ate every bite. When he looked up, Wren was watching him. Not staring, not intrusive, just watching like a person trying to read something written faintly on a wall. "You come far?" she asked. "Connecticut." Sage gave a low whistle. "That is a ways." He wrapped his arms around himself. The wind was colder now. He felt it in every bone. Darcy fed the fire with dry twigs, and the light played across Wren's face, deepening the lines around her eyes, catching the scar on her hand. "Your wife," Wren asked gently. "Dead 14 months. Consumption." He paused. She never saw Noah walk. Wren did not flinch, just nodded once slow. She stared into the fire for a long time before she spoke again. "My husband died 2 years back. Holt. Tree fell wrong up on the North Ridge. Timber run." The words came out flat, practiced, like she had said them to herself so many times they had lost their edges but not their weight. Caleb looked at her scarred hands, rough and capable, at the way Darcy had held Noah earlier with that trembling tenderness. He looked at Sage, who sat apart with her rifle across her knees and her eyes on the dark, and understood that these three women were not just ranchers living in the mountains. They were survivors, each carrying something that would not be put down. They sat in silence after that. The fire crackled soft and steady. Somewhere a nightbird called. The darkness came on slow and heavy. "You going somewhere?" Wren asked finally. "I was. Now I do not know. You have people waiting." "Ha ha no." Sage looked at her sisters. Something passed between the three of them without words, the way it does between people who have lived close enough and long enough to share a language made of glances. Wren turned back to the fire. "Our father died 8 months ago. Pneumonia. Left us the ranch, 160 acres. Some cattle. Creek runs clean." She paused. "It has not been easy. 3 women running a ranch in Montana. People talk. They talked about worse things than ranching," Sage added. Her voice was sharp as her eyes. Caleb said nothing. He had already learned in Hartford that silence was sometimes the most respectful response a person could offer. Wren continued, "We are headed home now. The cabin is a few hours more. You and the children can stay until you figure what comes next. No obligation." "I do not want charity," Caleb said. "It is not charity." Darcy spoke from beside the children where she sat cross-legged with Noah's small hand in hers. "It is just a door. A door." Caleb thought about every door that had closed behind him in the past 14 months. The door to the hospital room where Sarah stopped breathing. The door to the accounting firm that no longer employed him. The door to his brother's house that never opened. "Thank you," he said. By morning the frost had settled on their blankets and the horses' manes sparkled with ice. The children woke hungry and Darcy made a thick cornmeal mush that Emmy ate carefully, making sure Noah got his share. Noah laughed when he missed the spoon. It was the first laugh Caleb had heard from either child in weeks. Wren watched the children eat. Her face did not change, but something behind her eyes did. A softening, a remembering. Caleb saw her hand move to her stomach and then stop as if she had reached for something that was no longer there. They rode again. Wren walked again. The land changed. The road narrowed and split into deer paths through low grass. Trees thickened. Cottonwoods gave way to scrub oak and sycamore. The mountains rose blue and heavy on the horizon. The air thinned and sharpened. Late in the afternoon, the ranch appeared, tucked against the shoulder of a hill where the land rose quiet and the wind lost its edge. Larger than Caleb had expected. A cabin with weathered boards and a roof patched with canvas, yes, but also a solid barn, a lean-to for horses, a chicken coop and fence line that stretched in both directions across the ridge. 3 women had built this. 3 women and their father before them, and now 3 women alone. "That is it," Wren said. Caleb stared. It did not look like safety. It looked like a question. Inside the cabin was dark but clean. 3 cots against the walls, a stove in the corner, a table with 4 chairs. Dried herbs hung from the rafters, Darcy's work. A rifle rack above the door held 3 weapons. Everything spoke of a household that was organized and functional and entirely feminine in its practical strength. Wren lit a lantern. The soft gold glow pushed back the shadows. "You and the children take the cabin," she said. "We bunk in the barn. You do not have to do that. All 3 of you," Sage cut in before Wren could answer. "Wouldn't be proper otherwise. And if Edna Prescott hears a man is sleeping under the same roof as 3 unmarried women, she will be at the church door before sunrise." "Who is Edna Prescott?" the judge's wife, Wren said. "And the closest thing to a plague this town has known." Caleb wanted to argue. He did not. Instead, he laid Noah on the cot and covered him with his own coat. Emmy curled up beside her brother, one arm flung protectively over his middle. Darcy knelt beside the wooden crate she had padded with wool and extra blankets, making it into a bed for Noah if he rolled during the night. Then the 3 sisters stood together at the door, Wren in the center, Sage to her left, Darcy to her right. The lantern light caught their faces, and for a moment Caleb saw them as they truly were. Not 3 separate women, but a single thing, a wall, a force, a family that had been cut down to its essential parts and had refused to fall. "We will be close," Wren said. "Wren," she looked back, "I do not know what this is, but thank you, all 3 of you." Her eyes lingered on him a moment longer than they needed to. Then she tipped her hat, and the 3 of them left. The door clicked shut behind them. That first night, as Caleb tucked the blanket around Emmy's shoulders, his hand brushed something beneath the cot. He knelt and reached under. His fingers closed around a tin box. He pulled it out carefully and opened it in the lantern light. Inside, he found 3 things: a letter on yellowed paper written in an unfamiliar hand, a pressed wildflower purple flattened between 2 squares of paper, and a photograph creased at the corners of a young woman standing beside a tall man. Both were smiling. The woman was clearly Wren, a few years younger, her face softer, her eyes full of something that was no longer there. The man was broad-shouldered and dark-haired, with the kind of easy grin that belongs to people who have not yet learned what the world can take from them. On the back, in faded pencil, Wren and Holt. June 1877. Our beginning. Caleb held the photograph. He understood the weight of what he was holding. A woman who had folded this picture and placed this flower and kept them beneath the bed where no one would see, but where she could always reach down and know they were there. He placed everything back exactly as he had found it. He said nothing about it. Not that night, not ever. Days passed slow. Caleb swept the floor, helped with dishes, boiled creek water for laundry. He was clumsy at first with the physical work of the ranch. His hands blistered on the second day when he tried to split kindling, and Sage watched him struggle with an expression that hovered between pity and contempt. "He can barely hold a hammer straight," Sage said to Wren one evening, not bothering to lower her voice. "What use is he?" Wren said nothing. She watched Caleb through the window as he tried again, splitting the wood with more determination than skill, and if she saw something in his effort that Sage did not, she kept it to herself. Darcy was kinder. She showed Emmy how to gather herbs by the creek and let Noah follow the ranch dog around the yard until both boy and animal collapsed in the dust, exhausted and happy. She taught Caleb which plants were medicine and which were poison and how to tell them apart by smell. On the third day, a rider came, not one of the sisters. A lean man with sun-cracked lips and a skeptic's squint. He introduced himself as Boone Driscoll, said he worked for the Coulter Ranch during the busy seasons. He looked at Caleb and the children with open suspicion. "You brought home a city boy and 2 extra mouths to feed in the middle of winter coming on," Boone said to Wren. He did not lower his voice. "What are you thinking?" Wren said nothing, just looked at Boone and kept looking until the man went quiet. That afternoon, while Caleb hung laundry on the line behind the cabin, Boone walked past him. He stopped, not looking at Caleb directly, and said in a voice that carried no malice but no warmth either, "You know how she lost Holt?" Her husband Caleb kept his hands on the wet cloth. "No, ask her about the timber run, the one she sent him on alone." Then Boone walked on and Caleb was left with the wind snapping the laundry and a new question settling in his chest like a stone dropped into still water. He did not ask. Not that day. He had learned that some truths come when they are ready, and pulling at them too early only tears the fabric. Instead, he proved himself in the way he knew best. Not through strength, through the mind he had spent 30 years training. The storm came without warning on the 5th night. Not a blizzard, not yet, but a hard wind that screamed through the valley and shook the cabin walls and tore a section of the east fence clean away. Wren and Sage had ridden out that morning to check the cattle at the far pasture and had not returned by dark. Caleb heard the cattle lowing, restless. Then he heard the creak of the broken fence and the thud of hooves on soft ground. The cows were getting out. He looked at Emmy. "Watch your brother!" Then he pulled on a spare coat, grabbed the coil of rope and what tools he could carry from the lean-to, and walked out into the dark. He could not work wire. His hands were not built for it, but his mind was. He studied the break by lantern light and saw what the wind had done and what the fence needed. Not the brute force approach of driving posts and twisting wire, but something structural. He used the rope lashing cross braces between the standing posts. He scavenged boards from the lean-to wall and angled them as buttresses. He tied knots the way a book on maritime rigging had taught him years ago in Connecticut, bowlines and clove hitches and figure-eights that held against tension in ways that raw muscle could not achieve. Emmy appeared halfway through with a second lantern and said nothing, just held the light steady while her father worked. 7 years old, and she held that lantern like a surgeon's assistant, unwavering, while a man who had never fixed a fence in his life built one from rope and ingenuity and the absolute refusal to let these women's cattle scatter into the dark. By dawn, the fence held, not beautiful, not traditional, but standing. When Wren rode in with Sage behind her, both of them mud-splattered and grim from a night of chasing strays, she found Caleb sitting on the porch step with raw hands and a face pale with exhaustion. She looked at the fence, studied it, looked at his hands, looked at his face. She did not say thank you, did not say well done. She gave one nod, slow and deep. That nod carried more weight than any words Caleb had heard in years. Sage stood behind Wren looking at the fence, then at Caleb, then at the fence again. Her squint had changed, not warm yet, but the hardness had cracked. "What kind of knots are those?" Sage asked. "Maritime," Caleb said. "I grew up near the harbor." Sage said nothing more. But that night she ate 2 bowls of the stew Darcy made and did not say a single word against Caleb's presence. That evening, Caleb found Wren on the porch sitting in the dark with her hat in her lap and the wind pulling at her collar. He sat beside her without asking permission. "Where did you learn to build like that?" she asked. "Books," he said. "I learned most things from books." She turned her head just enough to look at him. The scar on her hand caught the faint light from the window. Her eyes were tired, but steady. Something shifted in them. Not surprise. Recognition. "Books do not teach most men to bleed for someone else's cattle," she said. He looked at his bandaged hands. "I am not most men." It was the first time he saw her close to a smile, not quite there, but close enough to change the shape of the silence between them. She did not know how many more silences they would share before the silence itself became a language. She did not know that the next sound to break it would be hooves on the road and a voice that would turn everything they had built in these few days to ash. On the seventh morning, Caleb brought Wren the letters, all 11 of them, the advertisement, the responses, the contract with his signature at the bottom and the careful hand he had learned in school. Wren read them at the table, slowly, her face drained of color with each page. "I did not write these," she said. The words fell like stones into still water. "This is not my handwriting. None of us placed this advertisement." She held up a letter. "Look, the return address. This is a post office box in Copper Bend. Our mail comes to the general store. We do not have a post office box." Sage took the letters. "Read them." Her gray eyes narrowed. "Someone used our name, our ranch, our family. Who would do that?" The three sisters looked at each other. Something passed between them that Caleb could not read. Wren turned to him. Her voice was careful. "Mr. Whitmore, did anyone in Copper Bend direct you here, Num? I hired a wagon from the train station. The driver left me on the road. I was walking when you found me. Then whoever placed this advertisement wanted you here, but did not want to be seen bringing you." The question hung in the cold air of the cabin like smoke from a dying fire. Who had written those letters? Who had used the Coulter name, and why did they want a man, specifically a husband, delivered to this ranch? Caleb did not know the answer, but he could feel it waiting just beyond the edge of what he could see, patient and heavy and full of teeth. It came on a Tuesday morning. Clear sky, sharp air, the kind of day that tricks you into thinking the world is on your side. Darcy was feeding the chickens. Emmy was helping Sage stack kindling. Noah was chasing the dog around the woodpile. Caleb was in the barn mending tack with hands that were finally learning the shape of the work. Wren was at the table going through the false letters one more time, looking for the details she had missed. Two riders came up the trail. The first was a heavy man on a chestnut horse, well-fed in a land of lean people. He wore a vest buttoned tight over a broad belly, and his face was flushed red from the ride, or from whatever he had been drinking at breakfast. His smile was wide and showed too many teeth. His eyes showed nothing at all. The second rider wore a deputy's star pinned to a coat that had seen better days. His hand rested on the butt of his holstered pistol. The heavy man reined in and looked at the cabin the way a man looks at a thing he intends to own. Eyes moving from the door to the roof to the fence line to the three women who had emerged from various corners of the property to stand together in the yard. "Well now," he said, "Mr. Whitmore, I see you found your way to the ranch after all. My apologies for the inconvenience." Caleb came out of the barn, his stomach turned to ice. The heavy man swung down with a grunt, adjusted his vest. "Silas Everett," he said, "I believe we have business to discuss." He pulled papers from his coat. The contract, Caleb's signature at the bottom, and above it the words he had signed his name beneath words about marriage and obligation and a life that had been built entirely on lies. "This contract," Silas said, his voice pleasant and conversational, "binds Mr. Whitmore to a marriage arrangement with the Coulter family. I represent the Coulter family's interests in this matter." Wren stepped forward. Her voice was low and hard and carried an edge that could cut wire. "You represent nothing of ours. We did not place that advertisement. We did not write those letters, and we did not authorize any arrangement." Silas studied her. The smile did not waver. "Miss Coulter, I understand your confusion. Perhaps your father arranged this before his passing. My father would never have done this without telling us. The law does not require your knowledge, only your father's intent, and I have documents that suggest his intent was clear." He pulled another paper from his coat, something that looked older, more worn, a letter in a hand that made Sage draw a sharp breath. "That is Pa's handwriting," Sage said. Wren looked at the paper. Her face went white, then hard, then still. Whatever she saw there, she locked it behind a wall that Caleb was learning to recognize. 30 days, Miss Coulter," Silas said. "That is what the law allows. 30 days to fulfill the terms of this arrangement. After that, I return with a court order." He gathered his reins. The deputy followed. But before he rode away, Silas turned in his saddle and called back. His voice carried clear in the cold morning air. "Ask your new guest about Hartford, Miss Coulter. Ask him why a bookkeeper with 2 children would travel 2,000 miles to marry a stranger. Maybe he has not told you everything." Then he was gone, dust settling behind him. the sound of hooves fading down the trail. Wren turned to Caleb. The three sisters stood together, and the space between them and him felt suddenly wider than the 2,000 miles he had crossed to be here. "Is there something you have not told us?" Wren asked. Her voice was steady. Caleb did not look away. He did not make excuses. "My employer in Hartford was stealing from his clients. I found the discrepancies in the books. I reported it. They destroyed me for it, fired me, blacklisted me, told every firm in the city I was a liar and a thief." He paused. "I came here because no one in Connecticut would give me work, because I had two children and no money and no future I could see, and because those letters described a life I wanted to believe in." The wind moved through the yard. Emmy stood in the doorway watching, Noah pressed against her side. Wren looked at him for a long time, at his city boots ruined now, at his soft hands blistered and torn, at his eyes, which held the same exhausted honesty she had seen on the road when she found him. "That sounds familiar," she said. It was the first time Caleb understood that the distance between them might not be as wide as it seemed. They had both been betrayed by systems built to protect them. They had both lost everything for telling the truth. They were both standing in the wreckage trying to build something from what remained. The morning was still clear. The sky was still blue. But everything had changed. That night, after the children slept and Sage had gone to check the perimeter with her rifle, Wren sat at the table with the false letters and the contract and the paper that bore her father's handwriting. Caleb sat across from her. Darcy moved quietly around the stove, making tea from dried chamomile. "The handwriting is Pa's," Wren said finally, "but the words are not. He would never have arranged a marriage for me without asking." "Then someone forged his hand," Caleb said, "or took a genuine letter and added to it." Wren's jaw tightened. "Silas was here the week after Pa died. Said he was paying respects. He was alone in this cabin for 2 hours." Caleb felt the pieces shifting. "He collects things," Caleb said slowly. "Letters, documents, anything he can use." Wren looked at him. In the lamplight, her eyes were darker than usual, and the tiredness behind them had been joined by something else. Something fierce and gathering like a storm building behind the mountains. "We have 30 days, she said. "We have each other," Darcy said from the stove. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute conviction. "And that is more than he thinks we have." Wren looked at her youngest sister, then at Caleb, then at the papers on the table. Outside, the wind pressed against the cabin walls. The lantern flickered. Somewhere in the barn, Sage's footsteps moved steady and sure across the loft. Caleb did not sleep for a long time. When he finally did, he dreamed of a road that went on forever, and three women walking ahead of him, carrying something he could not see, and no matter how fast he moved, he could not close the distance between them. But he kept walking. In the dream and in the life that waited for him on the other side of it, he kept walking. Because that was what Caleb Whitmore did. He had always walked, and he was not done yet. Winter came to the Montana Territory the way trouble comes to good people. Slowly at first, then all at once. The first frost painted the cabin windows white by the second week of November. By the third, the creek ran sluggish and cold, and ice formed along its edges in thin sheets that cracked under the weight of a drinking cup. Wren stacked the firewood higher each week, cutting and hauling from the stand of pine on the north slope, with Sage beside her, the two of them swinging axes in a rhythm that required no words. They built a wall of split logs along the side of the cabin that grew taller than Caleb's head. They moved with the steady urgency of women who had survived enough of Montana winters to know what was coming and refused to be caught short again. Caleb learned how to keep the stove burning through the long, dark hours without choking it or letting it go cold. Darcy taught him which draft to close at midnight and which to crack open at dawn. He learned the sound the chimney made when the wind shifted north, a low moan like a sick animal, and how to adjust the flue before smoke backed up and filled the room. He learned slowly, and the sisters were patient with his slowness in a way that surprised him because he had expected scorn and received instead the quiet tolerance of people who understood that everyone has to learn somewhere. The children made a game of finding the warmest spot in the cabin, usually the corner where sunlight hit the floor for 1 hour at midday, a golden square that moved like a slow clock across the boards. Emmy and Noah would sit in it and let it travel over their faces, and for those few minutes the cold seemed like something that happened to other people. But there was a cold inside Caleb that had nothing to do with weather. Silas Everett's words played in his head on a loop he could not silence. 30 days. the forged letter in Ezra's handwriting, the contract with Caleb's own name at the bottom, and the question Boone had planted about Holt in the timber run that Caleb had not asked and Wren had not answered. 2 weeks had passed since Silas's visit. The deadline crept closer with every short gray day, and the walls of the small cabin seemed to tighten with it. They needed supplies: flour, salt, thread for mending. Caleb offered to go alone, but Wren shook her head. "I need to see the town," she said. "I need to know what Silas has been saying." She looked at him for a long time, then added something that cost her more than she showed. "And you should come. People should see you standing with us, not hiding on the mountain." Copper Bend sat in a shallow valley where two roads crossed and ambition had stalled. One main street of packed dirt, lined with buildings that leaned into each other like drunks holding one another up. A saloon at the center, large and freshly painted, the only building in town that looked like someone spent money on it. A church across the way with a crooked steeple. A general store on the corner with faded letters above the door that read, "Oak's Dry Goods." Wren stopped the wagon in front of the general store. Caleb climbed down and offered her his hand. She looked at it for a moment, then took it. Her grip was strong and her palm was rough, and the contact lasted no longer than it needed to. "Stay close," she said. "Do not wander toward the saloon." The store smelled of coffee and kerosene and dried apples. Margaret Oakes stood behind the counter, a solid woman with gray-streaked hair pulled tight, and the kind of face that had stopped trying to be pretty 30 years ago and settled instead for honest. She watched them enter with eyes that missed nothing. "You are the one staying with the Coulter girls," Margaret said, looking at Caleb. It was not a question. Wren set her list on the counter. "He is." Margaret studied Caleb. Then she began pulling items from the shelves. Flour, salt, a small cone of sugar wrapped in brown paper. She set them on the counter without tallying prices. Before anyone could speak, the door opened, and a gust of cold air brought in a woman who seemed to have been assembled from starch and disapproval. Edna Prescott was 50 years old, slim as a fence rail, dressed in a blue wool dress with a cameo at the throat, and she carried herself with the absolute certainty of a woman who had decided long ago that her opinion and the Lord's were interchangeable. Behind her came two other women from the church auxiliary flanking her like attendants. Edna stopped when she saw Caleb and Wren together. Her eyes traveled from Caleb's dust-covered vest to his blistered hands, to his face sunburned and peeling, then to Wren standing close beside him. She smiled the way a cat smiles at a bird it has cornered. "So the Coulter girls have taken in a mail order," husband Edna said. "Living together, no marriage, no preacher, 3 unmarried women and a strange man under one roof." She turned to her companions with a look of practiced sorrow. "Goodness." Caleb stepped forward before Wren could respond. His voice was calm, measured. The voice of a man who had spent years navigating boardrooms and difficult clients and had learned that tone mattered more than volume. "Mrs. Prescott, I sleep in the barn. The children sleep in the cabin with Miss Coulter and her sisters. There is nothing improper in this arrangement, and I would appreciate it if you did not suggest otherwise." Edna's eyes widened slightly. She was not accustomed to being addressed with such precise politeness by men who looked like they had been sleeping in hay. "My husband is the judge in this county, dear," she said, recovering quickly. "Propriety is exactly what we are discussing." Caleb held her gaze. "Then propriety should be discussed with accurate information, Mrs. Prescott, not speculation." The two women behind Edna exchanged glances. The gossip machine was already running, but Caleb had jammed a stone into its gears. Margaret Oakes stepped between them with the subtlety of a woman placing herself in front of a loaded gun. "Mrs. Prescott, I have your order ready in the back. Would you like to come and look at it?" Edna held Caleb's gaze for one more moment, a moment that said, "I know what happens to outsiders in this town." Then she turned with a swish of wool and followed Margaret through the back curtain. Wren looked at Caleb. Something had changed in her expression. Not warmth, not yet, but the careful blankness she wore around strangers had shifted, and behind it Caleb caught a glimpse of something that might have been surprise. "You did not have to do that," she said. "Yes, I did." Margaret returned a few minutes later alone. She leaned close. "Listen to me," she said. Her voice was low and fast. "Silas is telling everyone in town that you belong to him," she said to Caleb. "That you signed a contract and ran, Edna is his loudest trumpet. She has been whispering to every woman in the church that the Coulter girls are living in sin and those children are growing up godless. Margaret looked at Wren. And there is something else. A man arrived last week, a lawyer from Kansas, name of Kessler. Says he is related to the Coulter family. He has been asking about the ranch, about the land, about your father's will. Wren's face went still. Margaret slid the bag of supplies across the counter and tucked something extra inside. A small sack of sugar and a packet of dried apple slices. For the children, she said. And Wren. She squeezed the younger woman's hand once. You are not alone, even if it feels that way. They rode home in silence. Halfway back, Caleb noticed fresh hoof prints in the mud around the cabin perimeter, the barn door standing open by a hand's width. When they went inside, nothing had been taken. Nothing had been broken. But on the table, weighted down by a stone, was a piece of paper. Contract expires in 30 days. Come back, or I come for you. The handwriting was Silas's. Neat, unhurried. The hand of a man who had all the time in the world. Wren picked up the note. Read it, folded it, and put it in her pocket. Evidence was evidence. That night after the children slept, Caleb asked Wren for permission to see the ranch's financial records. She hesitated. The accounts were private. The accounts were the skeleton of the operation, and showing them to a man she had known for barely 2 weeks was an act of trust that went against every instinct she had built since Holt's death. But she brought them to the table. Caleb worked by lamplight until the small hours. The numbers told a story that the sisters had been too close to see. He laid it out for them the next morning, all three seated around the table with coffee going cold. Your feed supplier is overcharging by 20%, he said. I compared these invoices to the price list Margaret keeps posted in the store. You are paying premium rates for standard grain. Sage's eyes narrowed. How do you know what Margaret charges? I looked. While Wren was talking to Mrs. Prescott, I read every price list on every wall of that store. He pointed to a column of numbers. Here and here. Your cattle buyer in Copper Bend is recording lower weights than actual and keeping the difference. These numbers do not match what a herd this size should produce. Wren stared at the ledger. How can you tell? Because I spent 8 years reading numbers that people were trying to hide. I know what honest books look like, and I know what theft looks like. These are theft. Darcy leaned forward. Who is stealing from us? Everyone, Caleb said, or near enough. Your feed supplier, your cattle buyer, and more than that. He pulled out a separate sheet where he had done his own calculations. Silas Everett has purchased your ranch's debt from the bank. He now holds the note, and according to the county records Margaret showed me, he has also purchased 3 parcels of water rights upstream from your best grazing land. All in the past 6 months. All since your father died. The cabin was silent. He is not just coming for the contract, Caleb said. He is strangling this ranch from every side. Debt, water, suppliers. He wants you desperate enough to agree to anything. Wren's hands lay flat on the table. Her knuckles were white. She looked at her sisters. Something moved between the three of them, a shared fury that had the quality of a fire being stoked rather than lit. They had been burning for a long time. They had just needed someone to show them where the fuel was going. Show me everything, Wren said. They worked together for 3 nights. Caleb organized every invoice, every receipt, every scrap of paper that documented the ranch's dealings. Wren learned to read the numbers the way she read the land, with patient attention to detail and a refusal to be deceived. Sage handled the arithmetic, her mind faster with sums than Caleb had expected. Darcy kept them fed and kept the stove burning and kept the children quiet. By the end of the 3rd night, they had a complete picture of what Silas Everett had done and was doing to destroy them. We need to find honest suppliers, Caleb said, and we need to document this fraud for the hearing. Wren nodded, her eyes had changed. The tiredness was still there, but it had been joined by something hard and bright. The look of a woman who had been hit and was now deciding where to hit back. The first real snow came in early December, and with it the crisis that changed everything. Wren and Sage had ridden out before dawn to check the herd at the upper pasture. Boone was with them. A section of fence had come down in the wind, and a dozen head had scattered into the timber. They would be gone all day. Caleb was at the table reviewing documents when he heard it. A sound from the back room where Darcy slept when she stayed inside the cabin. Low, wet, the kind of cough that comes from somewhere deep inside the chest where no cough should live. He found Darcy on her cot, curled on her side, shivering. Her skin was gray. Her forehead burned beneath his hand. Her breathing came in shallow wheezes, each one ending with a sound like tearing paper. Pneumonia, he knew it the way a man knows who has heard that sound before. Not from medical training, but from the room in Hartford where Sarah had coughed and coughed and coughed until she could not cough anymore. He needed a doctor. The nearest one was in Copper Bend, 3 hours by horse in good weather. In this storm, which had descended sometime in the night like a white curtain dropped from the sky, it could be 6, or it could be forever. And Caleb Whitmore could barely ride a horse. He stood in the cabin doorway and looked at the storm. Snow fell sideways, driven by a wind that screamed through the valley. The temperature was dropping so fast he could feel it through the walls. The trees in the near distance were invisible. The barn was a shape. Emmy appeared at his side. She looked at Darcy, then at the storm, then at her father's face. She was 7 years old and she understood. "Papa," she said. Her voice was very small. "She is sick like Mama was." Caleb knelt beside his daughter. He took her face in both hands and looked her in the eye. "I need you to do something for me, Emmy. I need you to take care of Darcy and Noah while I am gone. Can you do that?" Emmy's chin trembled, but did not break. She nodded. "Keep the stove burning. Keep Darcy warm. Put hot cloths on her chest the way Darcy showed you with the herbs. And do not open the door for anyone except me or the Coulter sisters. Anyone." She nodded again. Her eyes were bright with fear, but her jaw was set, and in that moment Caleb saw Sarah in her face so clearly it nearly broke him. He pulled on every layer of clothing he could find. Wren's spare coat, a scarf Darcy had knitted, gloves that were too small for his hands, but better than nothing. He went to the barn and saddled Wren's horse, the bay mare, with hands that shook from cold and from the knowledge of what he was about to attempt. He had ridden a horse exactly 11 times in his life, all of them in the past 3 weeks. He was not good at it. The mare knew it, and he knew it, and the storm did not care. He mounted. The mare shifted beneath him, nervous in the wind, sensing his uncertainty. He gripped the reins the way Sage had taught him, too tight, always too tight, and pointed the horse toward the road that led to Copper Bend. The storm swallowed him in seconds. The cold was not a temperature. It was a presence. It pressed against his face and his chest and his hands and found every gap in his clothing and filled it with ice. The wind screamed and the snow drove horizontally and the horse moved, not because Caleb directed her, but because the mare knew the way to town and went there out of instinct and training, which was fortunate because Caleb could see nothing. Not the road, not the trees, not his own hands on the reins. He rode for 3 hours, perhaps 4. Time lost its meaning in the white. His hands went numb first, then his feet, then his face. He could not feel the reins, could not feel the saddle, could feel only the animal beneath him moving with steady determination through conditions that should have killed them both. He fell off twice. The first time the mare stopped and waited while he crawled back into the saddle, sobbing with cold and pain and a fury at his own body for failing. The second time he lay in the snow and considered not getting up. Considered the peaceful logic of stopping, of letting the white take him, of ending the cold, and the fear and the bone-deep exhaustion that had been his companion for 14 months. Then he thought of Darcy's gray face, of the sound of her breathing, of Sarah in Hartford coughing while the doctor was still an hour away, of the medicine that arrived one day too late. He got up. He climbed back on the horse. He kept riding. Copper Bend materialized from the white like a ghost of itself, buildings appearing one by one from the snow. Caleb fell from the saddle in front of Doc Crane's office and crawled to the door and hammered on it with hands that could no longer form fists. The door opened. Doc Nathaniel Crane looked down at the frozen, half-dead man on his doorstep and understood everything without being told. In 60 years of doctoring in Montana Territory, he had seen that look before. The look of someone who has ridden through death to save someone else. 10 minutes later, they were mounted and heading back into the storm. The ride back was worse. Caleb's body had used everything it had. He clung to the saddle horn with frozen claws and followed the doctor's horse through the white and spoke to himself in a constant low murmur that was not prayer and was not conversation, but something between the two, the sound a man makes when he is keeping himself alive by refusing to stop making noise. They reached the cabin at dawn. The storm was dying, the wind falling to a moan, the snow settling into vertical columns that drifted against the walls and the fence posts and the barn. Caleb fell through the door. He did not walk through. He fell. His face was blue-white, his lips cracked and bleeding. Ice hung from his eyebrows. His hands were claws. He had been in the saddle for 6 hours in a blizzard that would have killed most experienced riders in 4. He could not ride, and he had ridden anyway. He could not survive it, and he had survived anyway. Not because he was strong, but because he had decided that failure was not available to him. Emmy was there. She had done everything he asked. The stove was burning. Darcy was wrapped in blankets. Hot cloths had been changed every hour. Noah slept in the corner, oblivious to all of it. Doc Crane went to work immediately. His hands shook with cold, but his eyes were sharp. He listened to Darcy's chest, mixed a tincture, spooned medicine into her mouth. He worked with the steady assurance of a man who had fought this particular enemy many times and knew its tactics. An hour passed, then 2. Darcy's breathing changed. The rattle softened. Her color shifted from gray to white to the faintest pink. Her eyes opened and found Emmy's face, and she smiled, a weak and trembling thing, but alive. Alive was all that mattered. Wren arrived an hour later. She had ridden home the moment the storm broke, enough to see, pushing her borrowed horse through drifts that reached its belly. She came through the door with snow on her shoulders and panic in her eyes, and stopped dead when she saw Doc Crane kneeling beside Darcy's cot. Her gaze swept the room. Darcy breathing, Emmy exhausted but upright, Noah sleeping, Doc Crane working. Then she saw Caleb. He was sitting against the far wall where he had collapsed. His coat was still on. Ice was melting down his face. His hands lay useless in his lap, the fingers swollen and white. He looked half dead. Wren crossed the room. She knelt in front of him and took those frozen hands in hers and pressed them against her chest, trying to give back some of the warmth he had spent. She did not plan what happened next. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his and cried. Not delicately, not quietly. She cried the way a woman cries when the thing she feared most has been turned away by a man who could barely sit a horse but rode 6 hours through a killing storm because he had been late once before and swore he never would be again. Caleb was still for a long moment. Then his arms came up around her, slow and stiff, and he held her. His body was shaking. She did not ask if it was the cold or something else. She did not need to ask. They stayed that way until the shaking stopped. Doc Crane waited until Wren released Caleb, then pulled her aside. His voice was low. "The girl will live," he said. "Keep her warm. Keep her fed. She will cough for a week, but the worst is past." Wren nodded, unable to speak. Doc hesitated. Then he leaned closer. "There is something else you need to know. Silas has been meeting with the judge. He has Prescott halfway in his pocket, and he is pushing for the hearing to happen sooner." He paused. "And the lawyer from Kansas, Kessler. He has been in the saloon with Silas 3 times this week. They are working together, Wren. Whatever they are planning, it involves your land and that man's children and a hearing you are not ready for." The words landed like stones. Wren stood very still. Outside, the storm had died to nothing, and the world was turning white and quiet and full of the kind of silence that follows catastrophe. She looked at Caleb, slumped against the wall with melted ice pooling beneath him. She looked at her sisters, Darcy weak but breathing sage, arriving through the door, with snow in her auburn hair and fury on her face because she had heard every word. She looked at the children, Emmy still holding the lantern she had carried all night, Noah stirring now, with a yawn. Then she set her jaw and began to think. The days after the blizzard were the quietest Caleb had known since arriving in Montana. A hush settled over the land, thick as the snow itself. Caleb recovered slowly, his hands peeling and raw from frostbite that stopped just short of permanent damage. Darcy wrapped them in salve and clean cloth each morning, her own recovery progressing faster than anyone expected, as if the youngest Coulter sister had decided that illness was an inconvenience she could not afford. Noah took his first steady steps during this time. He had been walking before, wobbling and uncertain, but something in the aftermath of the storm seemed to have galvanized him. He tottered across the cabin floor from Emmy's outstretched hands to Wren's, his small arms spread wide like sails catching wind. When Wren caught him, she let out a laugh that came from somewhere deep and surprised. Her eyes shone with tears she did not hide. Caleb saw. He did not speak. Some things were better left unnamed. The rhythms of the household deepened. Caleb cooked now, having learned from Darcy during her recovery. Not well, but adequately. The sisters built and rode and worked the land. The children grew into the spaces between the adults, filling them with noise and warmth. Emmy helped Sage stack firewood and earned a rare nod of approval. Noah followed Darcy everywhere, calling her name in his high, clear voice until she answered. And somewhere in the spaces between the work and the silence, something else grew too. Caleb noticed it in small things. The way Wren saved the best cuts of jerky for the children, but always made sure he ate before she did. The way she checked the doors and windows 3 times before sleeping. The way she paused whenever Emmy laughed, even at some small thing, and held still as if the sound deserved to be heard completely before the world could move again. One night after the children had fallen asleep and the wind pressed soft against the walls, Caleb sat beside the stove and asked the question he had been carrying since the road. "Why did you help me that day? You could have ridden past." Wren was mending a bridle. She did not look up. "You look like someone who had done everything he could," she said, and it still was not enough. His throat closed. He turned toward the stove so she would not see. Later, when the fire had burned low and Sage had gone to the barn for the night watch, Caleb found Wren on the porch. The night was clear and the stars were hard and bright. He sat beside her without invitation. "Why me?" he asked. "Out of everyone on every road in Montana, why did you stop?" She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "You look like someone who deserved to have somebody stay." The distance between them was the width of a fist. He could feel the warmth of her through the cold air. He reached out and took her hand. She let him. And they sat together in the dark, holding on while the snow caught the starlight and the whole clearing shimmered. They did not kiss. Not yet. But Wren laid her hand against his chest and felt his heart beating beneath her palm, steady and strong, and he put his arm around her waist and held her close. What passed between them was not fire, but something quieter and more durable. The slow heat of 2 people who had been burned before and learned to value warmth over flame. Then from somewhere down the valley, the sound of hooves. Margaret Oakes arrived on a mule wrapped in so many layers she looked twice her size. Her face was red from the cold and tight with urgency. She did not dismount. "Wren," she said, "I came as fast as I could. Silas is spreading word that your husband Holt's death was no accident and that you sent him on that timber run, knowing the ridge was unstable. Edna Prescott has taken it up like a hymn. Half the town believes you got your husband killed to keep the ranch for yourself." Wren's face went to stone. Margaret continued, "But that is not the worst. The lawyer Harlan Kessler has been meeting with Silas 3 times this week. They are working together. Kessler is claiming that as Ezra's male relative, he has legal standing to challenge your ownership of the land. He says unmarried women cannot hold homestead claims without a male guardian." She reached into her coat and pulled out a folded newspaper. "There is one more thing." She handed it to Wren. "Silas has filed a notice in the county record. Public claim that Caleb Whitmore is contractually bound to the Coulter family and that the arrangement constitutes a binding agreement. And Kessler has filed a petition for stewardship of the Coulter Ranch. Both cases set for the same hearing, 7 days from now." Wren unfolded the newspaper, her name in print. Her sisters described as unfit landholders. Caleb named as an accomplice in an irregular domestic arrangement. The language was legal and precise and designed to make all of them sound like something less than decent. She folded the paper, put it in her pocket alongside Silas's earlier note. 2 days later, Harlan Kessler came to the cabin. He arrived in a hired buggy with Deputy Buckley riding alongside. Harlan was exactly as Caleb had imagined a man would look who crossed 1,000 miles to take something that did not belong to him. Tall, thin, dressed in a dark suit with a watch chain across his vest, the kind of clothes that cost more than most people in Montana earned in a season. His face was narrow and clean-shaved and careful. He stepped down from the buggy and looked at the cabin the way a man looks at something he intends to condemn. "Miss Coulter," he said. His voice was polite, practiced. "I am Harlan Kessler, your father Ezra's cousin." Wren stood in the doorway. Sage was behind her with the rifle not quite pointed at anyone, but not quite pointed away either. Darcy held Noah on her hip. "I know who you are," Wren said. "Pa mentioned you once. said you never visited, never wrote, never cared. Harlan produced a document. I have filed a petition for stewardship of the Coulter Ranch. As your father's nearest male relative, I believe I can provide appropriate legal oversight for the property. Wren did not move from the doorway. You want to oversee a ranch you have never set foot on, land you have never worked, cattle you have never fed. The court will decide what is appropriate, Miss Coulter. Not sentiment, he looked past her at the cabin interior. A judge will want to know why 3 unmarried women are attempting to hold a homestead claim without proper legal standing, and why a strange man from Connecticut is living on the property with 2 children and no clear purpose. Caleb stepped out from the barn. He walked toward Harlan with the steady gait he had learned from watching Wren, the gait of a person who did not hurry because hurrying gave the impression the world could make you afraid. He stopped beside Wren, but did not step in front of her. Wren spoke. Her voice did not waver. We will see you at the hearing, Mr. Kessler, and I will bring every piece of evidence of who has actually worked this land and who has not. Harlan studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded once, turned, and climbed back into the buggy. After the buggy disappeared, Darcy took Wren's hand. The youngest sister looked at the oldest with eyes full of the question children ask when the walls start to shake. Are they going to take the ranch from us? Wren knelt. She took her sister's face in both hands. No one is taking anything, I promise. But her hands trembled. That night, Wren told Caleb the whole truth about Holt. They sat on the porch step in the cold. The children were asleep. Sage stood watch at the barn. Holt and I married, young Wren said. He was strong and kind, and he loved this land more than anything except me and the life we were going to build. 2 years ago, Silas offered to buy the ranch from Pa. Pa refused. Said this land was for his girls and always would be. She paused. Her breath made clouds in the cold air. A week later, Holt went on a timber run up the North Ridge. Alone. I asked him to wait for Boone, but he said the weather was turning and the timber needed to come down before the snow. He was like that. Never waited when he thought the work needed doing. She looked at her scarred hand. The tree fell wrong. That is what they told me. A dead pine hollow at the base. It should have fallen uphill. Instead, it came down sideways and caught him where he stood. She stopped, swallowed. When she spoke again, her voice had the quality of something that had been broken and reassembled too many times. But the cut marks on that tree were too clean, Caleb. Too deliberate. Someone had notched the base beforehand, made it fall exactly where a man would stand when working the trunk. Pa went up there after the funeral and saw the marks. He could not prove anything. No witnesses. No footprints in the snow, just the marks. And 6 months later, your father was dead, Caleb said. Pneumonia, Wren said. But he was strong before Holt died. Strong as an ox. After the funeral, something went out of him. He stopped eating right, stopped sleeping. When the sickness came, he did not fight it the way he should have. Caleb reached for her hand, rough on rough, callous on softness. The hands of a rancher and a bookkeeper. Neither one built for the life they were living, both refusing to stop. You did not send Holt to his death, he said. And whatever Silas is telling people, whoever notched that tree, that is not your burden to carry. She did not speak, but her hand tightened around his, and they sat that way for a long time while the dark pressed close and the stars burned cold above them. Inside the cabin, Caleb found something that night that changed everything. He was reaching beneath the cot for an extra blanket when his fingers brushed the tin box again. He had not opened it since the first night, but something made him reach for it now. The photograph of Wren and Holt was there, the pressed flower, and beneath them a letter he had missed before, smaller, folded into a tight square. The paper was soft from being handled many times. The handwriting was different from Ezra's. It was lighter, more deliberate. The ink was faded nearly to nothing. To whoever finds this after I am gone. I, Ezra Coulter, leave the ranch and all its holdings to my 3 daughters, Wren Sage and Darcy Coulter, in equal share. No man alive has claim to this land except by their invitation. Signed this day in the presence of Doc Nathaniel Crane, witness. And below that, in a different hand that Caleb recognized as the doctor's careful script, witnessed and attested. N. Crane. Caleb held the paper. His hand shook. This was Ezra's real will, not the forged letter Silas had produced. The genuine document hidden where only someone looking carefully would find it. But the page was torn at the bottom. A clean tear. straight, as if someone had placed a ruler along the fold and pulled. Whatever had been written below the doctor's signature was gone. Someone had been in this cabin. Someone had found this document and torn away part of it. And whoever that someone was had left the rest, perhaps not realizing what remained was enough. Caleb placed the letter back, closed the box, slid it beneath the cot. He sat in the dark for a long time. Then he went to the table, lit the lantern, and began to write. He wrote down everything. The fraudulent advertisement using the Coulter name, the forged letters in his own correspondence, the contract built on deception, the financial fraud in the ranch accounts, Silas's threatening note, Margaret's testimony about the other brides, the cut marks on the tree that killed Holt, Ezra's hidden will. He organized them, numbered them, built the case the way he had built the fence in the storm, one piece at a time with bleeding hands, and the knowledge that failure was not something he could afford. He did not have a lawyer. He did not have money. He did not have the judge's wife on his side. He had numbers. He had documents. He had the truth. When dawn came, Caleb was still at the table. He heard Wren's boots on the porch before the door opened. She came in with cold on her shoulders and saw the papers spread across the table and the lamp burning low and the man who had not slept. She sat down. She read. And when she looked up at him, her eyes held something new. Not gratitude, not surprise. The look of a woman watching someone fight for her family with the only weapons he had and finding them sharper than she expected. "We have 7 days," she said. "Then we use every one of them," Caleb said. Wren stood. She put her hand on his shoulder. Her fingers were rough against his shirt. 7 days, she said again. "And then we fight." She left to start the morning work. Caleb sat alone with his papers and his pencil stub and the knowledge that somewhere out there Silas Everett was counting on them to break. He would learn what happened when a bookkeeper from Connecticut decided that the numbers would tell the truth even if no one else would. On the 5th night, with 2 days until the hearing, Wren sat beside Caleb at the table and said the thing neither of them had been willing to say aloud. "If we were married before the hearing," she said, "the contract claim falls apart. A married woman cannot be bound by a fraudulent arrangement. And the land claim strengthens because a married couple on a homestead has legal standing that unmarried women do not." Caleb set down his pencil. He looked at her. Is that the reason? Wren met his eyes. Her face was open in a way he had not seen before, stripped of the careful reserve she wore like armor. "No," she said, "it is not the reason. But it is the truth that the law would see." "I do not want to marry out of fear," Caleb said. "Then do not. Marry because you want to." The snow was falling again outside the window. Soft, straight down. "No wind, I want to," he said. Something moved across her face, not quite a smile. The space where a smile would live if she ever let it. She reached out and brushed a snowflake from his hair with a tenderness that made his chest ache. Then the next morning she woke to find him gone. The horse was not in the barn. The saddle was not on the rail. His coat was missing from the hook by the door. On the table, held down by the same stone Silas had used for his threatening note, was a piece of paper. Caleb's handwriting, careful and slanting in the way of a man who had spent his life making numbers instead of letters. "There is something I must do before I can stand beside you at that hearing. I will be back. Trust me." Wren read it 3 times. She held the paper in both hands and felt the familiar tremor that came whenever someone she depended on walked through a door and did not say when they would return. Holt had left on a Tuesday morning. He had said he would be back by dark. The tree fell at noon. Emmy found Wren at the table before sunrise. The girl looked at the empty barn and understood. "Is he coming back?" Emmy asked. "Yes," Wren said, because she needed it to be true. The day passed, then the night. Wren fed the children, checked the cattle, kept the stove burning, organized the legal documents. Sage rode the perimeter twice, rifle across her saddle, watching for Silas or Kessler or anyone else who might come up the trail. Darcy kept Emmy and Noah close, telling them stories about mountain flowers and the names of stars. On the second night, Wren could not sleep. She lay in the barn loft where she had been sleeping since Caleb's arrival and stared at the rafters and listened to her sisters breathe and thought about the man from Connecticut who had ridden into a blizzard for her sister and was now gone somewhere she could not follow. Every man she had trusted had left. Holt left on a timber run and never came back. Her father left by closing his eyes one night and not opening them again. Silas had smiled and promised and lied. She reached into her pocket and felt the paper she carried everywhere now. The threatening note, the false advertisement, the newspaper clipping, and Caleb's letter that said, "Trust me." She did trust him. That was the terrifying part. She got up, went to the cabin, lit the lantern, sat at the table. She picked up the pencil and began to write. She wrote down everything, her own version, her own voice, not the bookkeeper's numbers, but the rancher's truth, what her father had built, what Holt had died for, what three sisters had maintained through drought and blizzard and grief, what Caleb Whitmore had done since arriving. The fence in the storm, the ride through the blizzard, the books he had balanced that revealed the theft. She organized it the way she organized a cattle drive, one step at a time, one truth at a time, moving forward because standing still was not something any Coulter woman knew how to do. By dawn, Wren was still writing. Sage found her there and sat down and picked up a second pencil and began helping without being asked. Darcy brought coffee and then she sat down too and added her own accounts, the herbs she had gathered, the animals she had healed, the garden she had planted, every piece of evidence that three women had poured their lives into this land. 2 days until the hearing, Caleb gone. Enemies circling, no allies, but a shopkeeper, a doctor who owed them a debt of courage, and whatever was left inside three sisters that had not yet been broken. Wren set down the pencil. She looked at Sage. She looked at Darcy. These women who had been beside her through every loss and every fight and every freezing dawn when the work seemed impossible and they did it anyway. She picked up the pencil again and kept writing. Caleb came back on the third morning. Wren heard the horse before she saw it. She was standing at the stove heating water for the children's breakfast, and the sound reached her through the cabin walls like a pulse traveling through rock. She set the pot down, wiped her hands on her apron, walked to the door and opened it. He was coming up the trail on foot leading the horse. The animal was lathered and blowing hard, and Caleb looked like he had not slept in 2 days. His eyes were red-rimmed, and his beard had thickened beyond stubble. His coat was crusted with trail dust and dried sweat and the particular grime that comes from sleeping on the ground beside a fire that gives no warmth. But his back was straight, and his step was sure. And when he saw Wren standing in the doorway with the light behind her and the cold around her, something in his face changed, not a smile, something before a smile. The foundation on which a smile might one day be built. A second figure walked beside him, shorter, thinner, bundled against the cold. Doc Nathaniel Crane. The old man carried his medical bag in one hand and a leather satchel in the other, and he moved with the stiff determination of a person who has made a decision and intends to see it through regardless of what it costs him. Caleb stopped at the foot of the porch steps. "I am sorry I left without telling you why," he said. Wren came down the steps. She stood in front of him with her arms crossed, not in anger, but in the way of a woman holding herself together until she knows whether she can let go. "You are here," she said. "That is enough." He reached into his coat and pulled out 2 documents. The first was a single sheet of paper bearing Doc Crane's signature and an official county seal. A medical affidavit. Wren took it and read. The document stated in careful medical language that Doc Crane had examined the remains of the tree that killed Holt Coulter and found evidence consistent with deliberate sabotage. Notch marks at the base showed tool work inconsistent with natural breakage or standard logging cuts. Furthermore, Doc Crane attested that he had witnessed Ezra Coulter's genuine last will and testament, which granted the ranch an equal share to his 3 daughters, and that any document contradicting this will was fraudulent. Wren looked at Doc Crane. The old man stood with his hands in his coat pockets and his chin tucked against the wind. He met her eyes. "Should have written that 3 years ago," he said, "after Holt died. After your father showed me those cut marks. I was afraid of what Silas would do to my practice, to my family, to this town." He let out a breath. "Fear makes cowards of us. Silas has had this town under his thumb so long, most of us forgot we had spines." Wren folded the affidavit and held it against her chest. The second document was a homestead registration. Caleb had ridden to the county recorder's office and filed a formal claim for the Coulter Ranch under the sisters' names, 160 acres registered and stamped and bearing the territorial seal. Not full ownership yet, that would take years of improvement, but it was on record, it was legal. It gave the Coulter sisters a claim that existed in ink on government paper, rather than only in the memory of a dead man. You did this for the hearing, Wren said. I did this because it should have been done a long time ago. Caleb said, your father meant for this land to belong to you and your sisters. Now it does, on paper, where it cannot be stolen by men with better suits. Wren looked at him, at his tired eyes and his cracked hands and the snow melting on his shoulders. She wanted to say something large enough to hold everything she felt, but language was too small for it. So she stepped forward and took his hands between hers, rough against rough, callous against callous, and he understood. Sage appeared in the barn doorway. She had her rifle in one hand and a look on her face that mixed suspicion with something that was trying very hard to be hope. You are back, she said to Caleb. I am back. You look terrible. I feel worse. Good. She almost smiled. That means you earned it. Behind Sage, Darcy emerged with Noah on her hip and Emmy at her side. The children saw Caleb and ran. Emmy hit him at the knees and Noah reached from Darcy's arms with both hands grabbing at the air until Caleb took him and held him against his chest, and for a moment the only sound in the clearing was a 3-year-old boy laughing because the person he wanted was back. Doc Crane cleared his throat. The hearing is tomorrow, he said. We should talk about what to expect. They sat inside around the table, all of them, Wren and Caleb and Sage and Darcy and Doc and Margaret Oakes, who arrived an hour later on her mule with a basket of bread and a jar of honey, in the particular expression of a woman who has decided that today is the day she stops being careful. Doc laid out what he knew. Silas had hired a claims adjuster from Helena to present his case. Harlan Kessler would represent himself. Judge Amos Prescott would preside. Edna's husband, which was dangerous but also a man who had spent 30 years on the bench and took the law more seriously than he took his wife's gossip. The two cases would be heard together. Silas's claim that Caleb was bound by the marriage contract and Kessler's petition for stewardship of the Coulter Ranch. Wren spread her papers on the table. She had organized everything during the 2 nights Caleb was gone, and now she added his documents to the stack. The false advertisement, the forged letters, the contract built on lies. Ezra's hidden will, the financial records showing systematic fraud by Silas's suppliers. Doc's affidavit about Holt's death and the genuine will. The homestead registration. She talked through her case point by point. Doc listened. Margaret nodded. Sage sat with her arms crossed and her jaw tight and her gray eyes sharp as knives. Darcy held Emmy's hand beneath the table where no one could see. Caleb sat still, his hands on his knees, watching Wren with an expression that had moved past admiration into something like awe. He had built the scaffolding. She had built the case. When she finished, Doc leaned back in his chair. There is one more thing I can offer, he said. His voice had dropped, and his eyes moved to the table. 2 years ago, a young woman named Sarah Willows came to my office in the middle of the night. She was one of the people Silas brought to Copper Bend. The third one. The room went quiet. She had been beaten, Doc said. Her face was swollen and her arm was sprained, and she was terrified. She said Silas would kill her if she tried to leave. I gave her what money I had and put her on a freight wagon heading east before dawn. I never told anyone because I was afraid. Margaret reached across the table and gripped the old man's hand. I will say all of this in court, Doc said. Under oath. Whatever comes of it. Wren looked at him. Thank you, she said. Doc nodded once and looked out the window. The snow was falling again, gentle this time, and the light that came through the glass was the color of forgiveness. That night, after everyone had prayed and after the children were asleep and Sage and Darcy had returned to the barn, Wren sat on the porch with Caleb. The sky was clear in the west and clouded in the east, and the stars showed through the gap like lanterns in a distant window. Are you ready, he asked. No, she said. But I am going anyway. He almost smiled. That is the only kind of ready that matters. She leaned into him. His arm came around her shoulders. They sat together in the cold and did not speak about what tomorrow might bring, because speaking about it would have given shape to fears they could not afford to carry into that courtroom. Morning came hard and bright, the kind of morning that does not care what you have planned, that offers sunlight and cold in equal measure, and leaves you to sort out which one matters more. Wren dressed in the best dress. She owned a dark cotton thing she had pressed with a heated iron the night before. Her hair was pinned tight. Her boots were cleaned of mud. She did not look wealthy or powerful or connected. She looked like exactly what she was. A woman who had run a ranch through drought and death and blizzard and was still standing. Sage wore a clean shirt and trousers, her hair braided tight, her rifle left reluctantly in the wagon. She looked like she was going to war, which in a way she was. Darcy had put on a cream-colored blouse that brought out the warmth of her amber eyes, and she carried Noah on her hip with the easy confidence of a woman who had held children and calves and broken things her whole life and put them all back together. Caleb appeared from the barn in a clean shirt with his collar scrubbed and his boots shined for the first time since Wren had known him. He had shaved and combed his hair, and the effect was startling. Not the dusty, sunburned fish out of water she had pulled off the road. A man who carried himself with quiet dignity. The kind of man who wore his best because the occasion demanded it and who wore it without apology. They loaded the children into the wagon. Emmy sat straight as a soldier, her dress clean, her hair braided by Wren's careful hands. Noah chewed a piece of bread and watched the trees with bottomless fascination. Boone Driscoll met them at the edge of the trail. He was riding his own horse wearing a coat that looked like it had been brushed for the first time in its life. His hat was new, or at least newer than the one he usually wore. His face was freshly shaved and pink from the razor. Wren looked at him. "You do not have to do this." Boone shifted in his saddle. He was not a man comfortable with gestures. "I have watched you run this ranch since your husband died," he said. "I have watched you and your sisters work harder than any 3 men I know. I have watched that city boy ride through a blizzard for your sister when he can barely sit a horse." He paused. "Those children are clean and laughing and alive because of people in this cabin. If the court needs someone to say that, I will say it." They rode to town together. A wagon, 2 horses, 5 adults, 2 children, and 3 women who had nothing in common with the men who wanted to take their land except the belief that the truth spoken clearly might be enough. The courthouse was full. Ranchers and shopkeepers filled the benches. Edna Prescott sat in the front row, her back straight, her cameo at her throat radiating the confidence of a woman who believed the outcome was already decided. The church auxiliary women flanked her. Silas Everett sat at the plaintiff's table on the right beside a thin man with spectacles who had to be the claims adjuster from Helena. Silas was dressed in his best suit, his face scrubbed pink, his hair oiled flat. He looked like a man playing a part he had already rehearsed. Harlan Kessler sat at a separate table alone. His dark suit was cut too well for Montana territory, and his leather briefcase sat open before him with documents arranged in precise rows. He did not look at anyone. He looked at his papers with the cold focus of a man who had reduced human beings to entries in a ledger. Wren walked to the respondent's table on the left. She carried no briefcase. She had a small stack of papers tied with kitchen string and a pencil stub in her pocket. Caleb sat behind her in the gallery. Doc Crane sat 3 rows back. Margaret was near the door with Boone beside her. The children sat with Darcy and Sage in the second row, Emmy holding Noah's hand. Judge Amos Prescott entered through a side door. He was a tall man, thin in the way that age makes men thin, with white hair and a jaw that looked like it had been set in concrete. He wore no robe, just a dark coat and a white shirt, and he carried a gavel. He struck it once. The room fell silent. "We are here on 2 matters," he said. "A contract enforcement claim filed by Mr. Silas Everett and a stewardship petition filed by Mr. Harlan Kessler. Both concern the Coulter Ranch and associated parties." He looked at Wren. "Miss Coulter, you have no legal counsel." "No, sir. I will speak for myself." A murmur moved through the room. Prescott silenced it with a look. "Very well. Mr. Everett, present your claim." The claims adjuster stood, efficient and dry. He laid out the case with mechanical precision. Caleb Whitmore had entered into a marriage contract with the Coulter family through an authorized representative, Mr. Silas Everett. The contract was signed and legal. Mr. Whitmore had failed to fulfill his obligations. Mr. Everett sought enforcement. The adjuster placed the contract on the judge's bench. Caleb's signature at the bottom clear as a wound. Prescott studied the document. Then he looked at Wren. "Your response, Miss Coulter?" Wren stood. Her hands were trembling. She pressed them flat against the table until they stopped. Then she picked up her papers and stepped forward. "Your Honor, no member of the Coulter family placed the advertisement that brought Mr. Whitmore to Montana. No member of the Coulter family wrote the letters he received. No member of this family authorized any arrangement." She held up the letters. "Compare the handwriting." She placed them beside a sample of her own writing and her sister's writing. The hand is different. The return address is a post office box in Copper Bend that we do not own or rent. Someone used our family name without our knowledge or consent to lure a man to our ranch. She paused. Let the courtroom hear the silence. Mr. Everett claims to represent our family's interests. He does not. He never has. What he has done is this. She laid out the financial records one by one. He purchased our ranch's debt from the bank. He bought water rights upstream from our grazing land. He installed suppliers who overcharge us by 20% and a cattle buyer who records false weights. For the past 8 months since our father's death, Silas Everett has been systematically destroying our ranch from the outside so that we would be desperate enough to accept any arrangement he offered. The room stirred. Silas's face reddened. The claims adjuster started to rise, but Prescott waved him down. Continue, Miss Coulter. Wren turned toward the gallery. Mrs. Oakes, would you step forward? Margaret stood. She walked to the front of the courtroom with the steady gait of a woman who has carried heavy things her whole life and does not intend to put them down now. Mrs. Oakes, how many people has Mr. Everett brought to Copper Bend through mail order arrangements? Margaret did not hesitate. 4 that I know of. 3 women and Mr. Whitmore. And what happened to the first 3? The first 2 women ran, left in the middle of the night. Margaret paused. The third was a young woman named Sarah Willows. She arrived in the spring of 1877. She worked in Mr. Everett's saloon for 4 months. Then she disappeared. The courtroom erupted. Prescott hammered his gavel. Doc Crane was already standing. Your Honor, he said, I have something to add. He walked forward, set his medical bag on the floor beside the bench, straightened his back. In October of 1877, Sarah Willows came to my office at 2 in the morning. She had been beaten. Her face was bruised, her arms sprained, and she had marks on her neck. She told me Silas Everett had attacked her when she tried to leave. I gave her money and arranged passage on a freight wagon before dawn. I told no one because I was afraid. Doc's voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. I was a coward. I am telling the truth now because there are people in this courtroom who deserve better than my silence. The courtroom was absolutely still. Silas's face had gone gray. Deputy Buckley, sitting near the back, had removed his hand from his holster and was looking at the floor. Prescott studied Silas for a long time. Then he turned to Harlan Kessler. Mr. Kessler, your petition. Harlan rose, smoother than Silas, calmer. He presented his case with crisp, measured sentences. 3 unmarried women on unregistered land without a male guardian. The property lacked legal oversight. As Ezra's nearest male relative, Harlan was the natural choice for stewardship. Wren spoke before Harlan finished sitting down. Your Honor, I would like to present 2 documents. She placed the homestead registration on the bench. Filed 3 days ago with the county recorder. 160 acres registered under the names Wren Sage and Darcy Coulter. This land is legally claimed. We have an address. We have a home recognized by the territory of Montana. Then she placed the second document beside it. Ezra's hidden will, found beneath the cot in the cabin. Written in her father's hand, witnessed by Doc Crane. This is my father's genuine last will, she said. It leaves the ranch to his 3 daughters in equal share. It states clearly that no man alive has claim to this land except by our invitation. She looked at Kessler. Mr. Kessler has not visited our family in 20 years. He did not attend my father's funeral. He did not write when we were alone and struggling. He is here because the land has timber rights and mineral potential that he wants to control. He is not here for us. He is here for the trees. Caleb stood from the gallery. Your Honor, may I speak? Prescott considered, then nodded. Caleb walked forward. He carried no papers. He had memorized the numbers because that was what a bookkeeper did. I reviewed the Coulter Ranch's financial records for the past 8 months, he said. Since Ezra Coulter's death, these 3 women have maintained 40 head of cattle, repaired 300 yards of fence, survived a blizzard that killed livestock on ranches twice their size, and turned a net profit. I was a professional bookkeeper for 8 years in Hartford, Connecticut. I have audited firms with 50 employees. The Coulter Ranch accounts are among the most honestly kept I have ever examined. He looked at Kessler. Mr. Kessler's petition claims the ranch requires male oversight. The numbers say otherwise. The numbers say 3 women have managed this property better than most men in this territory manage their own. Boone Driscoll stood up from the back of the room. His new hat was in his lap. His face was red. He walked to the front with the stiff determination of a man swallowing something large. Your Honor, I work for the Coulter Ranch, have for 4 years seasonal. When they first took in Mr. Whitmore, I thought they were out of their minds. More mouths to feed in a hard winter. City boy who could not sit a horse. I said as much to his face. He paused, looked at Caleb, then at Wren, then at the judge. I was wrong. I have watched Miss Wren Coulter run this ranch better than most men I have worked for. I have watched Miss Sage bring in game when the larder was empty and stand guard all night without complaint. I have watched Miss Darcy heal a breached calf and nurse a pneumonia patient and keep 2 children laughing through the worst blizzard this territory has seen in 10 years. He swallowed. And I watched Mr. Whitmore ride 6 hours through that blizzard on a horse he barely knew how to sit because Miss Darcy was sick and he refused to let her die. That man cannot rope a steer or swing an axe worth a damn. But he can read numbers that catch thieves and tie knots that hold fences and ride into a storm for people who are not his blood because that is the kind of man he is. His voice roughened. Those children are clean. They laugh. The girl can braid rope better than most hands I have worked with. The boy took his first steps in that cabin. If this court needs someone to say that the Coulter sisters and Mr. Whitmore are building something worth protecting, I am saying it, and I will swear to it on anything you put in front of me. He sat down. His face was scarlet. He put his hat on his head and stared straight ahead. The courtroom was quiet. Even Edna Prescott had lost the satisfied expression she had worn all morning. She was looking at her husband on the bench with an uncertainty Wren had never seen on her face. Judge Prescott sat still for a long moment. He looked at the papers spread before him. The contract, the letters, the will, the affidavit, the financial records, the homestead claim. Then he looked at the children. Emmy sitting straight and still. Noah asleep against Darcy's shoulder, breathing softly, warm and alive, and unaware that his future was being decided by strangers. Prescott picked up the gavel. On the matter of the marriage contract between Silas Everett and the Coulter family, he said, the court finds the contract was created through fraudulent means. The advertisement was placed without the Coulter family's knowledge or consent. The correspondence was forged. The entire arrangement was designed to establish a fraudulent mail claim on the Coulter property. The contract is void. Mr. Whitmore has no obligation, contractual or otherwise. He paused. Furthermore, the testimony regarding Sarah Willows and the pattern of deception involving multiple individuals brought to this territory under false pretenses raises serious questions that warrant investigation by the territorial marshal. Mr. Everett is to be detained pending that investigation. Deputy Buckley is suspended effective immediately. 2 men from the back of the room, ranchers deputized that morning, moved toward Silas. He stood, his face a mask of nothing, and for one moment his eyes found Wren's across the courtroom. What she saw there was not anger, but something worse. The flat recognition of a man who has been outplayed by someone he considered beneath him. They let him out. The door closed behind him. The room exhaled. On the matter of the stewardship petition filed by Harlan Kessler, the judge continued. The court finds insufficient grounds to remove the Coulter sisters from control of their property. They have demonstrated continuous stewardship under extraordinary hardship. They have secured formal homestead registration. Their father's genuine will, witnessed by a licensed physician, clearly designates them as sole inheritors. Mr. Kessler's petition appears primarily financial in nature and is denied. Prescott set down his gavel. He looked at Kessler. Mr. Kessler, Ezra Coulter was your family. These women are your blood. If you wish to be part of their lives, that door is open. But stewardship for the purpose of controlling timber rights is not something this court will grant. Harlan stood, gathered his papers with precise movements, closed his briefcase, straightened his coat, walked toward the aisle. As he passed Wren, she spoke. Quiet, not angry, not triumphant, just clear. You can write to us, she said, whenever you want, if you mean it. Harlan stopped. Something moved behind the professional mask, something that might have been shame or might have been the ghost of a family connection he had spent years refusing to feel. He did not speak. He walked out of the courtroom into the cold Montana morning. The room emptied slowly. People filed past Wren with nods and murmurs. Some of the women who had whispered about her in the street now looked at her with something different. Not all of them. Edna Prescott swept past without a glance, her back rigid. But others lingered, touched her arm, said small things that meant more than they sounded. Margaret reached her first, wrapped her arms around Wren without a word. Sage stood nearby. Her arms crossed, her gray eyes bright, her jaw working against emotion she would not show in public. Darcy was crying openly, Noah still asleep against her shoulder, oblivious to all of it. Boone stood at a distance, hat in hand, looking at the floor. Wren walked over to him. "Thank you," she said. He looked up. His eyes were bright. He shrugged to one shoulder. "Just told the truth. That is all." Doc Crane was the last to leave. He stood by the door, his medical bag in hand, looking older than he had that morning, but lighter, as if the weight he had carried for years had finally been set down. Wren took his hand. "You were brave," she said. He shook his head. "You were brave. I was just late." He squeezed her hand. "Take care of that family, Miss Calder. You earned it." The ride home was quiet. The children sat in the back of the wagon, Emmy leaning against the sideboards with Noah curled in her lap. Darcy and Sage rode behind on horseback close together, their horses moving in step the way horses do when their riders share something deeper than a trail. Caleb drove. He had not spoken since they left the courthouse. His hands on the reins were steady. His face was calm. But there was something gathering behind his eyes, something that had been waiting for the right moment. Halfway home, where the road passed through a stand of cottonwoods and the snow had begun to melt into patches of brown earth and new green, he pulled the wagon to a stop. Wren looked at him. "Why are we stopping?" He set the brake, wrapped the reins, climbed down from the seat, walked around to her side of the wagon and stood there looking up at her with the trees behind him and the sky wide and pale and the first real warmth of spring touching the air. "In the courthouse," he said, "I talked about numbers and legal standing and homestead claims. All of that was true, but it was not the reason." Wren did not move. She watched him from the wagon seat and felt something shift inside her chest, a thing slow and deep and tectonic. "I want to be with you," he said, "not because of law, not because you need a man on the land for the court to take you seriously, not because I owe you or you owe me, because this life, this cabin, your sisters, your voice in the morning, and the way you laugh when you think no one is listening, it is everything I told myself I would never have again. And I was wrong to tell myself that." He looked at his hands, blistered and torn and scarred in places that had been smooth 2 months ago. Then back at her. "I do not have a ring. I do not have much of anything. But I have these hands in whatever time God gives me, and I want to spend it beside you. Not behind you, not in front of you. Beside you." Wren climbed down from the wagon. She stood in front of him. Behind them, Sage and Darcy had stopped their horses. Emmy was watching from the wagon bed. Even Noah had stopped squirming. "I do not need you to save me," Wren said. Her voice was steady. Her green eyes were clear. "I know," Caleb said. "You saved yourself. I watched you do it. I need you to stay. I will not go anywhere. I would walk through fire before I left." She looked at him for a long time, at the sunburned face and the soft hands that had hardened and the city clothes that had turned to ranch wear and the eyes that held a steadiness she had not seen in a man since Holt. Not the same steadiness, not a replacement, something new, something that belonged to Caleb Whitmore alone and to no one who had come before or would come after. "Then marry me because you want to," she said, "not because of a courtroom, not because of a contract, because you want to." "I want to," he said, "more than I have wanted anything since the day I forgot how to want." She stepped forward, he stepped forward, and in the middle of a muddy road between melting snow and bare cottonwoods, they kissed for the first time. It was soft and sure and unhurried, the kiss of two people who had lost everything and found each other and understood that what they were building was not a fire but a hearth. The kind of warmth that does not blaze and fade but holds steady through the long nights and the hard years and the ordinary, beautiful days that make up a life. Behind them, Sage made a sound that was probably a cough, but might have been something else entirely. Darcy was crying again. Emmy smiled, a real smile, the kind she had not worn since before her mother died. And Noah said something that sounded like more, though what more meant in the mind of a 3-year-old watching two people find each other on a muddy road in Montana no one could say. They held the wedding under the cottonwood tree behind the cabin on a morning in late March, when the first buds were breaking on the branches and the air smelled of wet earth and pine. There was no preacher, no church, no congregation, just the people who mattered standing in a clearing with the mountains behind them and the sky above them and the dirt beneath their feet. Sage stood to one side as witness, her arms crossed, her gray eyes bright with an emotion she would deny under oath. Darcy stood on the other side, holding Noah, tears already running, making no attempt to stop them. Boone stood at the edge of the clearing, hat in hand, freshly shaved, looking deeply uncomfortable and deeply moved in equal measure. Margaret stood beside Doc Crane, who held his medical bag like a lifeline, because even now he could not quite put it down. Emmy stood between Caleb and Wren, holding both their hands, connecting them. Caleb spoke first. His voice was rough and honest and unafraid. "I give you all I have," he said. "These hands, my name, my word. I came here with nothing but 2 children and a trunk full of broken things. You gave me a place to stand. I will never leave it. I can carry them when they are tired, and I can count the numbers when they do not add up, and I can stand beside you in any storm that comes, and I will." Wren spoke. Her voice was clear as creek water. "I have known loss," she said. "I have known the kind of silence that fills your bones and makes you wonder if you will ever hear anything again. But with you, I hear life. I hear my children laughing. I hear your boots on the porch when you come home. I hear the scratch of your pencil at the table when you think I am sleeping." She paused. "I am not afraid of the road ahead. I will walk it with you. And if I have to, I will carry you." Emmy stepped forward. In her hand she held something small, a flower, purple, barely larger than a thumbnail, dried and pressed flat between 2 squares of paper. She had found it by the creek the week before the first wild flower of spring, and she had pressed it in the pages of the Bible on the shelf above the stove. She laid it between their joined hands. Caleb looked at the flower, then at Emmy. "Why the Bible?" he asked. "So we remember the first sign of spring," the girl said. Wren's heart was so full she could not speak. Together she and Caleb knelt and placed the flower in a small hole they had dug at the base of the cottonwood tree. They covered it with dirt and pressed the earth flat with their palms, a flower buried where a family began. They stood. Caleb kissed her forehead. She kissed his jaw. And Noah, watching from Darcy's arms, asked the question that all children ask when the world changes shape around them. "Does this mean we are staying?" Caleb took the boy from Darcy and held him against his chest. He looked at Noah with eyes that were no longer tired, no longer haunted, no longer searching. "It means we are building," he said. 5 years passed, the cabin grew, new walls went up, then new rooms, then a proper porch with posts that did not sag, and a railing Caleb built from cedar that smelled sweet in the rain. He was not good at building, not the way Wren and Sage were, but he learned. He learned the way he had learned everything since arriving in Montana. Slowly, badly at first, and then with the stubborn competence of a man who refused to be defeated by a piece of wood. The barn doubled in size. The fence line extended across the north ridge and down to the creek. The herd grew to 40 head, then 60. A chicken coop appeared, then a smokehouse, then a garden where Darcy planted cabbage and carrots and the wildflowers that Emmy brought home from the creek bed every spring. Emmy was 12 now, tall and serious, incapable in the way of people who learned responsibility before they learned to play. She read every book she could find, and she was teaching herself to write in a journal she kept beneath her pillow. She could braid rope and calculate the weight of a steer by looking at it, things Sage had taught her, and she could identify every herb in the valley by sight and smell things Darcy had taught her. She was becoming all of them, and none of them, and entirely herself. Noah was 8. He had grown into a wiry, sun-browned boy who followed Sage everywhere and mimicked everything from the way she walked to the way she squinted at the horizon. He could track a deer through timber and carry 2 buckets of water without spilling a drop. He had developed a laugh loud and sudden and startling that came from a deep well of joy that Caleb had not known existed in his quiet son. Darcy had married Boone Driscoll the previous spring in a ceremony under the same cottonwood tree. Boone had asked Wren's permission first, which Wren thought was ridiculous, and Sage thought was correct, and Darcy thought was the sweetest thing she had ever seen. They lived in a cabin Boone had built on the south end of the property, close enough to walk to dinner, far enough for privacy. Their son, a tow-headed boy of 2 named Ezra, after the grandfather he would never meet played with Noah in the yard and came home covered in mud and happiness. Sage was still Sage, independent and sharp and solitary in the way of hawks. She ranged farther than any of them, hunting and tracking and riding the boundaries of the ranch with the rifle that had become as much a part of her as her arm. She had not married. She did not seem inclined to. When Margaret asked her once if she was lonely, Sage had looked at her with those gray eyes and said, "I have my sisters and my rifle and more sky than any person needs. What would I want with a husband?" But she was softer than she had been. She taught the children to shoot and to ride and to read the weather in the shape of clouds. She carved Noah a set of wooden horses for his birthday and pretended she had bought them in town. She let Emmy braid her hair one evening and sat still for the whole 30 minutes it took, which was perhaps the most patient thing Sage Coulter had ever done. And there were two more children in the cabin now. Hannah was 3. Black-haired and loud and fearless, she had been born in the cabin with Doc Crane attending and Emmy holding the lantern, and she had entered the world screaming as if she already had strong opinions about it. She had Caleb's blue-gray eyes and Wren's jaw and a temperament that belonged to no one but herself. The youngest was Holt, 1-year-old named for the man who had loved this land and died on it. Baby Holt had Wren's green eyes and Caleb's gentle hands, and he had recently learned to say one word with perfect clarity: Papa. He said it every time Caleb walked through the door, and every time Caleb stopped what he was doing and picked the boy up and held him against his chest with the same tenderness he had shown that first day on the road, when a stranger's hands had lifted his children and carried them to safety. Caleb still kept the ranch accounts. He was good at it, better than good, and the books of the Coulter Ranch were known throughout the territory as the most honest in Montana. Other ranchers sent their records to him for review. He caught fraud the way Sage tracked deer by instinct and training, and the absolute refusal to be fooled. The feed suppliers no longer cheated. The cattle buyers no longer rigged their scales. The numbers added up because Caleb Whitmore made them add up, and the ranch prospered because of it. But he did other things too. He had learned to ride, not well, never well, but adequately. He could split kindling without splintering it. He could mend fence not with wire, but with his own method of rope and braces and maritime knots that the other ranchers laughed at until they noticed the fences held longer than theirs. He had become something that Hartford could never have imagined: a ranchman, not born to it, grown into it, the way a tree grows into the shape the wind demands. Margaret Oaks still tucked extra sugar into their grocery bag, still squeezed Wren's hand across the counter. Doc Crane came quarterly to check the children. He was slower now, his steps more careful, but his spine was straight, and he carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who had found his courage late but had not let it go since. Edna Prescott had not spoken to Wren in 5 years. Wren did not mind. Silas Everett's saloon had been sold to a man from Billings who turned it into a general store. Silas himself had been sent to the territorial prison after the investigation uncovered not just the Sarah Willows incident, but a pattern of fraud and coercion stretching back 7 years. Harlan Kessler had written once, a short letter stiff and formal. He asked about the ranch and the children and said nothing about timber rights. Wren wrote back. She told him they were well. She invited him to visit. He never responded, but she kept the door open because that was what Wren Coulter did. She kept doors open, even the ones that might never be walked through. On a warm evening in late spring, Wren stood at the cabin door and watched her children play in the yard. 5 of them now, 5 voices, 5 sets of running feet, 5 reasons to wake up each morning and keep building. She reached out and touched the cottonwood tree. It had grown taller and broader in 5 years, its roots deep, its branches spreading wide enough to shade the entire porch in summer. Somewhere beneath it, pressed into the earth, was a dried purple flower that a girl had placed between 2 scarred hands on a morning when the world decided to begin again. Caleb came up behind her. His arms circled her waist. His chin rested on her shoulder. He smelled of ink and leather and the sweet cedar of the porch railing he had been sanding that afternoon. "You remember," she asked. He did not need to ask what. "The day you said you could carry them all." He looked out at the yard, at the 5 children tumbling and shouting, at the garden coming up green, at the fence line stretching clean and straight across the ridge, at Sage riding in from the timber with a deer across her saddle, At Darcy's cabin, with smoke curling from its chimney. At the life they had built from nothing, from a broken wagon and a dusty road and a single act of kindness offered without condition. There are more of them now, he said. She laughed. A full laugh, open and warm and unafraid. The laugh of a woman who had walked through fire and come out the other side with her hands full and her heart intact. But you can still carry them. Caleb looked at her. His face had more lines now. His hair had streaks of gray. His hands were rougher than they had been when he stepped off that train in Montana, calloused and scarred, and strong in ways that a bookkeeper from Connecticut could never have imagined. But his eyes were warm. The tiredness that had lived behind them for so long was gone, replaced by something that looked like peace. Always, he said. The wind moved through the valley. It stirred the grass and rustled the cottonwood leaves and carried with it the smell of earth and wildflowers and the smoke from a chimney that stood straight and true. The sky was wide and the mountains were blue, and the road that Caleb Whitmore had walked so long ago stretched empty in the distance, carrying no one, leading nowhere he needed to go. He was already home. Above the clearing, the sky was clean. No clouds, no storms gathering on the horizon, and not a single buzzard in sight.